Okay, if you got a Bible this morning, I hope that you do. Go ahead and grab it, and we're going to be in the Gospel of John, chapter 14. Keeps happening. John chapter 14. If you don't have a Bible, there are paperback Bibles on the back table. And if you don't own one, you can grab one of those and take it with you. It's our gift to you this morning. John 14. And hopefully, if you've been coming to Redemption any length of time or you know me, you know this, but I don't use the rug, the platform, the stage for any political purposes at all. I don't think, while that what matters here and now, I don't think that who's the next president of the United States or who's in the Senate or the House ultimately matters or will ultimately give the peace that your soul desperately needs, the hope that your heart longs to know. But after the events that took place yesterday, there are many Americans who are troubled and anxious and fearful. And yesterday in Pennsylvania was just a microcosm of the fracture of our society, the division and the vitriol that exist in our nation. And we see this on all fronts, not just the political front, on all fronts ideologically. We see this divide taking place, this great shift, and we can look at what happened yesterday as an example and the countless other examples. And look, just pause for a second. There's something desperately wrong with our hearts if you would not be just as equally grieved if the assassination attempt had been inflicted upon Biden as it was upon Trump. There's something desperately wrong with us. If we would have given thanks for the assassination attempt for one man and yet loathed it for another man, that shows the divide of our hearts. That shows the hate and the ill that exists in our society. And with all of that in mind, kind of staring us in our face and much more to come, no doubt, providentially, months ago, I picked out, but ultimately, God determined the text that we would read the morning after an assassination attempt on a former president of the United States. And these are the words that Jesus himself says, John chapter 14, verse 1. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Well, Jesus, there's much in the 21st century. There was much in the first century that could trouble our hearts. Like, I understand that you're saying this to my soul this morning here, mid-July 2024, but do you really know what's going on in our nation? Do you really know what's going on in my workplace? Do you really know what's going on in my marriage? Do you know what's going on in my life, in my soul, in my heart? Do not let your hearts be anxious. Do not let your hearts be troubled. How can he say this? Because, it just sounds like kind of trite advice, if we're honest. Sounds kind of pithy. Sounds like what we would say to one another. Oh, you lost your job? Don't worry about it. Your marriage is in conflict? Don't let your heart be troubled. Your child's in the hospital? God's got this. Just trust God. Where's your faith? But what Jesus is saying here is far from trite. And he's going to give us the reason, the fuel for why our hearts should not be troubled. Look what he says. Verse 1, do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I am going to prepare a place for you? And if I go away and prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you to myself, so that where I am, you may be also. You know the way to where I am going. So Jesus is delivering this epic speech. Don't be troubled. You know where I'm going. Believe in God, believe also in me. I'm going to prepare a place for you. I'm going to come again. You know what's up. You've been with me for 3 years, but leave it to Thomas to say, Lord, we actually don't know where you're going. How can we know the way? Verse 6, Jesus told him, and he tells us, do not let your heart be troubled for this reason. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you know me, you will also know my Father. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. Lord, said Philip, show us the Father, and that's enough for us. And Jesus said to him, have I been among you all this time and you do not know me, Philip? The one who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words I speak to you, I do not speak on my own. The Father who lives in me does his works. Believe me that I am in the Father and the Father is in me. Otherwise, believe because of the works themselves. All right, so that's where we're going to break off this morning. And we're going to seek to find the refuge and peace and comfort, the tranquility, divine tranquility that Jesus is promising in this passage when he says, do not let your hearts be troubled. There's been a parable that has circulated for decades now. And you probably heard it. I've talked about it in the past a couple of times. But it's the parable, this ancient wisdom parable of the 4 blind men and the elephant, right? There's an elephant and 4 blind wise men are asked to describe this elephant. So they're led to various parts of the elephant. And so the first blind man is leaned up against the side of this elephant. And he says, well, an elephant is much like what I understand a wall to feel like, a barrier. Like it's thick and it's strong. The second blind man's like, no, you're an idiot. He's holding the trunk. He's like, it's like a long, strong, thick snake. Like that's an elephant. That's how we would understand an elephant to be. The next man has his arms wrapped around one of the ears. And he's like, no, it's like a ginormous fan. Like that's what an elephant is like. It's like a big fan. That's how I would describe it. And the final man is holding the tail. And he's like, no. It's kind of wispy and weird and smelly and humid back here. Like this is what an elephant is like. And the whole point of the parable is that it is depicting for us philosophical, ideological, religious movements throughout time, particularly major religions, who would say, we have a corner on the truth, but in essence, they're just describing what they know. They're describing part of it. And so everyone has a part or portion of the truth, but it's arrogant. The argument is, it's arrogant to say that you have a complete picture of the truth. Right? So Islam has the trunk of the elephant, and this is how they describe God to be. And Judaism has the side of the elephant, and that's how they describe God to be. And Buddhism is wrapped around a leg, and Hinduism is grabbing the ear, and Christianity is over here holding the tail. We all just have a picture of the truth, a part of the truth. So we should just all coexist and get along. Now, this is a radically idiotic parable and argumentation on so many levels. First of all, to say that it would be arrogant of the Christian, the Buddhist, the Muslim, the Hindu, the Jew, to say they have a corner on the truth, that they have a total picture of the truth, because they're all just feeling different parts of the elephant, requires that the person making that statement have a complete view of the truth. That they see the whole elephant. That I understand things that you don't understand in your warped religious narrow-mindedness. And so I see the whole elephant, and therefore I can tell you as Christians, you got about 20% over here of it right. But also, here's the argument as well. While it sounds on its base level airtight to some people, it begins to unravel because there's also no substantiation for this claim. How can we know that some only have part of the truth? Secondly, it tries to purport this idea, this misnomer that's very, very radically pervasive in our culture, and that is that all religions are fundamentally the same and only superficially different. When in reality, what we understand when you read the holy books, the Quran, these holy books of ancient religions, Buddhism, Judaism, is that all religions are superficially the same and fundamentally different on every level. They all portray different ways, avenues to get to God. But finally, there's no hope presented in this secular argumentation. You just all, okay, so we all just have a part of the truth here. Where does that leave us? It leaves us nowhere. Nowhere. We have nowhere to go, nothing to hold on to. And so what we do then is we go, well, if there's no basis for belief in this grand concept of let's just all get along and everything's ultimately the same and it doesn't really matter. If it actually does matter and there has to be some truth out there, we understand that logically, we understand that by reason, then it's incumbent upon us to figure out, hey, where is the truth? What are we supposed to believe? What do we hold to? In these moments of terror, where's the hope of our soul tethered to? All right? And so we could explore today, we don't have time, we could explore the claims of other false religions. But not only, and hear me say this, and I don't say this lightly at all, not only do they completely pale and show themselves to be fragile and insignificant in the face of the substantive proof of Christianity, Christ Jesus crucified and risen again, but also the message of Christ that we find here in John chapter 14. Hear me say this for your souls, when you might not even be a Christian here, his message that he declared here in the first century is radically different than any other religious system in the world, any other spiritual leader. So let's explore it together, all right? 3 things Jesus is saying here that you will not find anywhere else. And of course, this is validated through his resurrection. But Jesus says, John 14:6, and probably the most well-known of these 7 I am statements from the Gospel of John. These 7 statements we've been journeying through and unpacking together this summer. 7 statements that they would have really understood the significance, the beautiful and rich imagery of in the first century. This is the most well-known of them. Jesus says, I am way, I am truth, I am life. Or in other words, and if you're taking notes this morning, you can go ahead and write them down. I am way, truth, life. I am reconciliation. I am revelation. I am regeneration. Okay? So, first, I am reconciliation. We have I think, rather significant and a rather fickle relationship with the idea of exclusivity in our day. Now, I say rather fickle and significant, it's almost humorous, because when we hear exclusivity, there's instantly, for most of us, a loving and a loathing that occurs. Oftentimes, that which one of us loves, another person loathes when we hear about exclusivity. Okay, I'll just give you a couple of examples, all right? Think to yourself of a country club. At a country club, there are those who are inside. They have the resources, they have the time, they have the energy, they have the clout to be part of the country club, and they have access. They have their lockers, they have the showers, they have endless rounds of golf or tennis or whatever they do at country clubs. I don't know because I've never been a member. And then there's the rest of us, the fools on the outside. And so for those on the inside, they're members of the country club. What do we see? A love of it. This is my brotherhood. This is my sisterhood. Like, I love this. Those on the outside, there's somewhat of a loathing, if we care to loathe, about not being part of that. You also have the example, another example would be like a fraternity, a sorority. Okay, if you went to a normal college, unlike me, went to a Christian college, there wasn't that, but there was a normal college, there's fraternities and there's sororities, and there's who are in the fraternity, we're brothers now, and in the sorority, we're sisters now, and those on the outside of that looking in, and there's a love for those on the inside included, and there's a loathing or a hatred oftentimes, an animosity, a jealousy, and envy for those on the outside. Okay, I'll just give you one because most of you are post-college, so I'm going to give you one that's going to ring true for all of us. Costco. Okay? Yeah. I have literally met people, I'm no longer friends with them, but I've met people who have told me that the highlight of their week is their Costco run on Saturday. They'll just go in there for hours and get lost. And I get it. It's like the only place on the planet you can still get like a burger, a hot dog, fries, and a drink for like 99 cents or something. I don't know because I'm not a member. But people are so proud of their Costco membership. And then if you're not a member, if you're just one of the peasants like me, you're like, I don't get it. You people are annoying. What's so special? I would rather do almost anything in the world than surround myself in a box store with 10,000 people on a Saturday. Like, I just don't get that. I'll tell you where this lands true for me. TSA pre-check. Okay? TSA pre-check. So years ago, we traveled a lot, especially pre-kids, and we would fly all the time. And so Danielle was like, hey, we ought to get TSA pre-check. I'm like, that looks cool. That's, while we're standing, laboring in this line with our suitcases and all of our clothes off, these people are walking through fully dressed. And so I was like, yeah, we ought to do that. And so we went and applied, got fingerprinted, and did the whole 9. And probably a decade ago now, we got our TSA pre-check. And it is awesome, especially at Tampa International, right? Best airport in America. And you go to Tampa International, and from the curbside to the gate, it's about 18 minutes if you're not checking bags for us. So it's just awesome. And so we applied for that. Everything came through. You can't get it if you're like a felon or a terrorist or anything like that. And so so now when I go into line, I'm in the small line behind like 3 people, and there's like a line of 300 waiting to get in. I just think to myself, look at all you people, all you felons, all you terrorists in that line over there, right? Like all you bad people, and here I am. I'm gonna make my way through quick with my shoes on, with my coat on, with my hat on. They aren't checking my belt buckle. And for whatever reason, Allegiant, probably because there's only like 7 people that work for them, but Allegiant keeps leaving Danielle's TSA pre-check off. So me and the kids, they're with me, will go through, and I'm like, sorry, they must know the deal. But anyways, just so, but that's like, there's this idea, like, I don't know what it's like. I don't know what it's like for you guys to be in the other line, but I would imagine there's a loathing of those people. How did they do that? Same as at Disney, right? Or Universal. Somebody's in the fast pass line. You're like, they're probably a criminal. Like, I don't know how they got in that fast pass line. They passed all the rest of us, right? Like, so there's this idea that we go on and on and on this morning with the idea of exclusivity. But what we understand is this, that what we really hate is when there's a group, a society, a portion of people that are inside of a specialized program that there's no access to, that you cannot enter. You cannot be a part of. You are fully excluded from. We can't stand that oftentimes. We were flying out of, about a month ago or so, flying out of St. Pete Clearwater, going up to Tennessee to Knoxville. And we arrive early because we're checking bags. And sure enough, me and the kids go through TSA pre-check, and Danielle is stuck in the long line. And we get to the gate, and but before that, they, of course, Allegiant, we check in our bags, and the lady says to us, hey, that's gate like A7 or whatever. And she hands me a little card for TSA pre-check, and I stopped and I go, excuse me? She's like, you can go ahead and go through security, it's A7. And I go, I cannot believe the audacity, the nerve of you to tell me I have to go through a specific gate to get on a flight to Knoxville. There's a lot of airplanes lined up outside. There's a ton of different gates. I mean, it's St. Pete Clearwater, it's not literally like, there's like 6, but there's like 6 gates. I could try any of these. Like, how dare you? No, of course I didn't do that, because that would be stupid. That'd be idiotic, because we understand that to be part of something means, whether it's a country club, a Costco membership, TSA pre-check, whatever it is, we understand there is one path forward into that society, into that group, into that organization. We understand that. It's just common sense for us. And yet the world wants to rise up today. Even other religious systems want to rise up and try to marginalize or level hate against Christianity based upon the statement, not from us. Like, people will say, you really believe, you're so narrow-minded, you believe this? I'm like, I don't even need to believe anything. This is what Jesus said. It's not ultimately about your beliefs or my beliefs. That matters, as we're going to see when it comes to faith in him. But the truth stands whether you want to believe it or not. And Jesus here is saying, I am the way, or I am reconciliation. The only way, like you can see it here in the text, the only way to the Father is through me. Sociologists have been running a lot of tests in recent years, especially with the rise of social media. And what they found is very significant. The more that we are engaged in high tech, the more humanity craves high touch. So the more we're kind of lost down the dark rabbit hole of social media, and we're reading and we're studying and we're exploring, the more our souls are kind of left feeling fragile and brittle and flawed and desiring actual human connection. And I believe that this is just a reminder from within, a psychological, social reminder to us that we were designed to be in relationship. Like, I get it, I'm an introvert. The rest of you introverts are like, no, not me, okay? But we were actually designed, from the very Trinitarian relationship of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we were designed to be in a relationship in his very image, to be connected with others. Ultimately, there's a void within us, I would argue, and many philosophers, even non-Christian philosophers agree with this, there's that aching void within us that we can only describe in layman terms as homesickness. That we're missing something. That something is not as it should be. Now we understand, we look up at creation, Romans chapter 1, and we can tell that there's a God. We know there's a creator. And so the obvious answer to that homesickness is found in him. How can I be reconciled to him? And every other religion says, that's the way, or that's the way, or follow that path, or enter through that door, except for one faith. There's one faith where the founder of that faith says, I am the way. I am the way of reconciliation. I am the way back to the Father. No one is going to come to the Father. As a matter of fact, he draws on here, this is important here in the text, he draws upon an analogy, a story they would all have been incredibly familiar with. In ancient Judaism, the son would live with his father until he completed his apprenticeship and established his own business. And so oftentimes that establishment of the business would come after his wedding, after his marriage. And so the son would live with his parents, live in a room of his father's house as part of that family. And then he would go and he would betroth, he would ask for the hand of a young lady in a neighboring village or in his village, or wherever it might be, from a clan member. And the clan member, the father would agree, and there'd be a dowry price paid for the bride, and that would be noted. And so the groom-to-be and the bride-to-be would be betrothed there. It was very serious. It was a very sacred thing. And then the groom-to-be, this young man, would go back to his father's house, and there at his father's house, he would begin to prepare. He would bring in the necessary bedding, necessary elements to be a married couple. And then on a designated date, he would return to that village, to return to the clan, and he would marry this bride, and he would take her back to live with him in the deepest form of human intimacy known. So what is Jesus saying? I know if you grew up like me with King Jimmy, it was mansions, and we were all like, oh man, I'm gonna get that mansion when I go to heaven. But that's not the word here in the Greek. The word is room, guest room. He says, so here's what Jesus is saying. Don't let your heart be troubled. Don't be anxious. Don't be fearful. In my Father's house, in his mansion, there's really one mansion. Sorry to burst your bubble. If you're hoping to get the mansion out of it, you're probably in it for the wrong reasons anyway. But there's only one mansion. It's God's mansion. It's God's house. And there are many, many rooms. And I'm going to prepare one of those rooms for you, my bride. And when I come again, I'm going to take you with me where we will live in bliss and sinless intimacy forever. So don't let your heart be troubled. Don't freak out. Don't worry. There's a lot that could trouble you. Don't freak out. How can Jesus say this? I've used this analogy a couple of times. You guys have heard it. But as I'm reading it this week, I'm like, how can he say to his people, to us this morning, I am the way to restored intimacy, connection, reconciliation with the Father? How? Well, people will say, they'll come to Scripture and they'll say, like Richard Dawkins, the famous anti-theist, he actually started a group called Atheists for Jesus, where it was like, hey, like Jesus was a good guy, let's just try to follow his example. Because Jesus never claimed, Dawkins said, Jesus never claimed to be God. They don't understand the Bible at all. We've already talked in the beginning of the series, John chapter 8, where Jesus says, I am that I am, referring back to Yahweh in the burning bush. In every one of these texts, this one included, you see Jesus use this word, this collection of Greek words. When he says I am, just one phrase here, I am the way, the truth, and the life. But in the Greek, he would have been saying, I am that I am, ego eimi, I am that I am. He's referring to himself as God. The Father and I are one. The Jewish leaders always pick up stones to kill him because they understand he's claiming to be God. Another example of this for me, when I talk about reconciliation, there's a grievous offense against God that needs to be forgiven, that we need amnesty from, pardon from. It would be like this morning, I'm up here talking, and Cameron over there is like, you know what? I don't like what Aaron's saying at all. I don't like he even talked about the assassination. I wanted Trump to be assassinated last night, so I hate that he even talked about it. And so as I'm just talking, Cameron just throws down his Bible and walks up here in front of everybody and punches me in the face. If you don't think it could happen, it's happened in a lot of churches, okay? Not with Cameron, but so he punches me. And then, Devin's mortified over there. She's a peacemaker, she's sweet, and so she's like, oh my gosh, Cameron. And so a couple weeks go by and we have to sit down together. Cameron comes and he's still in a huff. And I'm like, well, why'd y'all want to call this meeting? Devin's like, well, because Cameron has something that he would like to say. And Cameron stutters and stammers through a would-be apology, and then Devin pats his leg and goes, it's okay, honey, I forgive you. And I would go, what? You can't forgive him. I mean, for embarrassing you, sure, but you can't forgive him for assaulting me. Because the offense was not against you. Only the offended party can forgive the one who has assaulted them. Like, we get that, right? So I know I've talked about this before, often about once a year I come back to this, but every single time Jesus says in Scripture, not the Father forgives you, but what does he say? I forgive you. What's he saying? Your offense ultimately was against me. So I am God. And there is no way of reconciliation back to the Creator, back to the one who formed you, fashioned you, and gifted you life. There is no grace apart from me. This is the hope of reconciliation. If you're here this morning, and look, let's just couple groups of people. We don't believe in good people and bad people. There's only bad people. All right. So there's two types of people still here this morning: redeemed, and we'll call them not yet redeemed. You're not yet a Christian, and you're like trying to explore, and you're trying to fill up that cavity, that void that you know is there. There is only one way. Jesus is saying, I don't even have to. There's only one way that can be filled. You think the next guy who's going to sit in the Oval Office is going to do it for you. I've got news for you. He never has, and he never will. Like, he never will. I'm not saying it's not important. I'm not saying don't go vote. Do whatever, however God leads you. But the guy in the Oval Office, the governor of Florida, your next big job, the man or the woman who you think will complete your life, just talk to a married couple for about 10 minutes and find out if that completed their life. Okay? It will never complete, it will never fill up the void. Only the way. Matter of fact, in the first century, Christian was first used at Antioch, and it was a pejorative term. It's a term of derision, of mockery. Look at those little Christs is what it meant. It was used by unbelievers mocking Christianity. Instead, when you would meet a follower of Christ, the way you would find out is you would ask them, are you a follower of the way? The only one way, singular way. So Jesus here is making this exclusive claim. We get that. I'm the only means of reconciliation. Have you? Look, I get it also. There's a second group, the redeemed group this morning. And let's just be honest, because that's the best place to be. We have followed the way by faith, by the radical grace of Jesus Christ. And yet oftentimes we're still looking for other ways to satisfy our deepest desires. And then we're bewildered. And oftentimes it takes a non-Christian to go, don't you believe in Jesus? Like, haven't you actually followed this way? I don't think I would want to follow that way. It doesn't even seem to satisfy you. There's a second thing here. So Jesus here is saying to them, they would have gotten that, reconciliation, one with the Father, through me, the way. He also says, I am the truth. So I want to do something this morning. We never do this, all right? And some of y'all are not going to play along because you just refuse to be told what to do. But if you're willing, I want you to close your eyes with me, okay? Take out your wallets and open them up. I'm kidding. Close your eyes. Close your eyes really quick, all right? And then if you're willing, I know it's a little hokey for us, but if you're willing, it's just an example. I want you to put your index finger up in the air, okay? All right, index finger up in the air, eyes closed, and I just want you to point north. Oh, this is going exactly how I thought it would go. All right, now you can open your eyes. Now, some of you are still pointing at the ceiling. That's a problem, okay? All right? But you can kind of look at it now. Look, I knew you were an astute crowd. Most of you are pointing this way. If you're not, your hand's already down, okay? You were unsure. I saw some people wiggling during that, like a compass, trying to figure this thing out. the whole point is we can't even, we are a society, I would argue, I love history, but a society almost more so than any before. And that is saying something that is driven by our dogmatic opinions on truth. I know it to be true, and don't tell me otherwise. It's nonsensical. And we look across the aisle at the vision, and we go, well, that's idiotic. And meanwhile, that group is looking at us and saying we're idiotic. And the whole reason behind that is because our biases and opinions are driving us rather than the truth. And we understand, I think we get it this morning, no matter where you point it, it doesn't change true north. There's one line that is true north. So if you were pointing this direction, it's up there somewhere, right? True north. Most of you are pointing this direction. But hardly anybody here probably was pointing true north on that line. And if you're just slightly off, what happens? You don't arrive at true north. You arrive thousands of miles off course. Thousands of miles away from your desired destination. And so what common sense would tell us is if we are going to, where north is doesn't ultimately matter. I mean, it matters at times when you're driving, but ultimately it doesn't matter. But what is ultimate truth matters greatly, and that cannot be left up to your opinion and your bias, to your tradition. You can sit here, this is very common in our country, even in churches. I just believe this because my parents believed it. Horrible reason to believe something that is supposedly absolute ultimate truth. I just believe it because it feels right to me. I just know it in my guts. On and on, the reasons to go. We tether our lives to not to what we think might be true, but to truth itself. And Jesus, think about it. Jesus steps on the scene here, and what does he say? I know the truth? No. I am the truth. That's incredibly significant because what Jesus is not saying that truth is a concept out there that I am submitting myself to and I understand it all. He is saying, I am the standard that all other things, including science and logic and reason and emotion and tradition, all humanity has to submit themselves to. I'm the truth. They would have understood this. The Greeks would have understood it in their society, in their day. I've talked about this as well before. A couple of things I'm just reminding you guys of this morning, but the Logos, beginning around the 4th century with philosophers, 4th century BC, so 400 years before Christ, the Logos in the Greek was discovered and talked about by Socrates and Aristotle and Plato and other famous philosophers. And the Logos was the entity, the power, the force, Star Wars force, so to speak, in their minds, that not only gave the world creation and formation, but held everything together and gave purpose to humanity. So the pursuit of the scholars and the intellects of these first 4 centuries was to find out what the Logos was. And it had differing opinions. And this was what formed the Epicureans and the Stoics and the different philosophical systems that emerged. Is we think this is the Logos, we think this is the Logos. And Jesus comes on the scene in John chapter 1, the same gospel, and he says, verse number 1 of chapter 1, in the beginning was the Logos. Okay, we get that. The force that created all things, that holds all things together, that gives all things purpose. But all of a sudden he blows up constructs, as he says, and this force was not a force, it was not an element, it was not an entity, it was a person. In the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God. Okay, we get that, it came from him. But the Logos was God. And the Logos, chapter 1, verse 14, the word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. That's what Jesus is getting after. He uses the word aletheia. Some churches have titled themselves that because it means truth in the Greek. But what's interesting is when you take a Greek word, some of you might know this, and you put alpha, A, in our language, a prefix on it, it means the opposite of whatever that word would have meant without the A prefix. Okay, so I mentioned this last week, Jason texted me about it this week, but to muse was very significant, very important for philosophers, and it has been for thinkers throughout time. We muse, we think deeply on something, but what happens? When we're tired of thinking, when our brains have run out, when we don't want to think deeply, we have a society that doesn't want to think deeply, so what do? We throw an A on the beginning of that, and it's now amusement, which means the lacking of deep thought, to not consider, Or you have a theist, somebody who believes in God, but you throw an A on that, it's an atheist now, someone without a belief in God, or an agnostic, someone without knowledge. So when Jesus says, I am aletheia, what is he saying? Letho in the Greek means to be hidden, to not be obvious, something that could be missed. But when he says, I am aletheia, he's saying, if you're paying attention, I can't be missed. It's obvious. I'm the standard of truth. I am reconciliation to the Father. No one comes to the Father without me. I am the revelation of the Father. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And then a final thing he says here, which is really good news for us, is I am regeneration. I am the way, I'm truth, and I'm life. I am the life. Well, now, he's already talked about this with the bread of life in week 2 of our study. We saw this last week when he says, I am resurrecting life, or I am the resurrection and the life in John chapter 11. Years ago, well, look, there's been a divide in my family. It's been kind of like a civil war for a few years. And it's mostly been me and my wife on one side, and our 3 little hoodlums on the other side, okay? And the war has raged over getting a pet, okay? Now, look, you might know, I got a dog this week. And I'm not going to say that I regret it already. But yesterday morning when I came down and he had defecated in his kennel, I had some thoughts and some words and some prayers that were uttered. But anyway, so we got a dog this week, but up to that point, for years and years now, as our dogs had slowly gotten older and passed away, my children were like, we want a dog, we want a dog, we want a pet, give us a pet. We'd go and we looked at the cats, we looked at the dogs. And so a few years ago, we were like, all right, we're gonna get you a pet. And they're like, hooray, Spurgeon was probably 4 or 5 at the time, and Evie's 2 or 3. And so we're like, hooray, like we're gonna get a pet. So we all go to PetSmart, and we walk into PetSmart past the little adoption center for the cats, and we make our way up to the fish aisle. And I'm like, take your pick of your pets, right? And I remember Spurgeon, the first couple of times we went, he was like 4 or 5. And he was like, Daddy, I don't like this. I don't like that they're trapped here. Like, look, they can only swim in this little box. Daddy, I'm gonna set it free. How are you gonna do that, bro? I'm gonna put it in my pocket. I'm like, well, first of all, that's called stealing. And we're not Baptists, so we don't do that. I'm just kidding. I was like, first, yeah. But secondly, like more importantly, he's not gonna live. Buddy, he's not gonna, he has to be in the water here, in this habitat. This is the only way that he can actually live. Once again, there's an arrogance that is, I believe, and just track with me here for a second. I'm not trying to like cast stones at anybody, but I think the world without the culture around us, and even many Christians, professing Christians at least, will look at Christians who actually wholeheartedly, convictionally follow the way, the truth, and the life, and will say that it's arrogant of us to submit ourselves to one to find the life that we desperately long for. And yet I always flip that back and I say, what are you depending upon? What have you tethered your soul to? That would go for all of us here this morning. What have we really tethered our souls for that we believe is going to fill up life? Life, zoe, is that Greek word we've explored already. It is life that transcends regular life. It is living our best life, a fulfilled life where our souls are contented, joy permeates throughout. How do we find that? And Jesus here says, he doesn't say once again, I am here, I know the way, or I know the truth. I am the way, I am the truth. Same with the life. He doesn't say, I know how to find life. Come here, let me tell you. He says, I am the life. Like, I'm what you need to breathe, to exist, for your lungs, the lungs of your soul to expand. I am life. And look, I get it. Like, you're coming here on Sunday morning. I'm glad you guys are here. I'm really glad you guys are here. But some of us are just kind of moving in and we're moving out because that's what we do on Sunday morning. And you need to stop and you need to hear this. Social media will never fill up your life. Like, once again, whoever is in the Oval Office will never satisfy your life. Your team winning the World Series this year. Believe me, I know, as a Braves fan in 21. It's not going to, you're going to wake up the next morning, you're going to be like, LeBron said it best. The philosopher LeBron James said it best a few years ago when he lost the championship, which he's done a lot, when he lost. And what do you say? All these people hating on me, they're just going to wake up to their like pitiful lives again tomorrow morning. Something like that, I'm paraphrasing. But he's right. Because whether LeBron won or lost, whether Jordan won or lost, whether your hockey team, whether Lightning win or lose, we're going to wake up to our lives again tomorrow morning. Where are we going to find purpose? Where are we going to find the breath in our lungs, the lungs of our heart, the lungs of our soul to breathe? Jesus says, that's only found in me. And if you've encountered him, you know he's telling the truth. You know it's legitimate what he's saying. And yet, what's the enemy? Well, you're like, well, the world around us is the enemy, right? The Republicans are the enemy. The Democrats are the enemy. Media is the enemy. No. G.K. Chesterton said, I look out at the world and I ask myself, what's the problem? And I come back with the answer. I am. I am the problem. And where do we run? We run to the law. Because it feels safe once again. It feels like, hey, if I obey, if I do the right things, if I vote the right way, if I behave myself properly, if I'm accepted by society, if I work well, if I punch in at the right time, if I have the picket fence, if I have the mowed lawn, whatever it might be, if I do the right thing, if I'm faithful and moral and upstanding and a great citizen, God will love me. And we might not say it exactly like that, but we find ourselves believing it often. Spurgeon, 19th century preacher, made this statement concerning the law. Like the fascination that draws the gnat to the candle, that burns off its wings, people by nature fly to the law for salvation and cannot be driven from it. So we light a candle and we see the bugs come around until they get too close and it burns off their wings and they die. And he's saying that's exactly what happens for us. We look at the rules, whatever the rules might be, however we've constructed them, and we're really good at that as religious people, as self-righteous people. We're like, look, here's all the rules that means acceptance for us. I'm going to follow them. And the closer we get, the more our wings burn until the life is sucked out of us. The law cannot, will not give life. Following the rules will not, cannot. Being religious, being moral, that could be important, that we could argue the importance of that in a secondary measure, but the reality is ultimately before God, the reconciliation our souls need, revelation itself, life, regeneration is not found in the law. It's not found in keeping the rules. I've got a little book here. You guys might remember it. We have not read it here at Redemption, but I've talked about it in the past. It's called Proof, Finding Freedom Through the Intoxicating Joy of Irresistible Grace by Daniel Montgomery and Timothy Paul Jones. Anyway, he's got a story in here, and we're going to wrap down this morning with this. He's got a story in here that I've read on a couple occasions when I've preached in the past. Don't tune out when I read. This is really important. When Jesus says, I am life, I am truth, I am way, this is why he would, look, if the law could do it, if you being good, if you being obedient, if you being moral could do it, he would not say, don't let your hearts be troubled. Instead, he would say, you should be really troubled. You should be really worried. Because you've got to be perfect. And we all know you can't. But instead, this is what he says. And I think it's summarized well here in this story. One of the guys writing talks about their adopted daughter and going to Disney World. You might remember it, but just hang with me. It says this, the pastor says, I never dreamed that taking a child to Disney World could be so difficult, or that such a trip could teach me so much about God's outrageous grace. Our middle daughter had previously been adopted by another family. I am sure that this couple had the best of intentions, but they never quite integrated the adopted child into their family of biological children. In a couple of rough years later, they dissolved the adoption, and my family, ended up taking this 8-year-old girl into our home. For one reason or another, whenever our daughter's previous family had vacationed at Disney World, they took their biological children with them, but they left their adopted daughter with a family friend. Usually, at least in the child's mind, this happened because she did something wrong that precluded her presence on the trip. And so, by the time we adopted our daughter, she had seen many pictures of Disney World, and she had heard about the rides and the characters and the parades, but when it came to passing through the gates of the Magic Kingdom, she had always been the one left on the outside. Once I found about this, I made plans to take her to Disney World the next time a speaking engagement took our family to the southeastern United States. I thought I had mastered the Disney World drill. I knew from previous experiences that the prospect of seeing cast members in freakishly oversized mouse and duck costumes somehow turns children into squirming bundles of emotional instability. What I did not expect was that the prospect of visiting this dream world would produce a stream of downright devilish behavior in our newest daughter. In the month leading up to our trip to the Magic Kingdom, she stole food when a simple request would have gained her a snack. She lied when it would have been easier to tell the truth. She whispered insults that were carefully crafted to hurt her older sister as deeply as possible. And as the days on the calendar moved closer to the trip, her mutinies multiplied. A couple of days before our family headed to Florida, I pulled our daughter into my lap to talk her through her latest escapade. I know what you're going to do, she stated flatly. You're not going to take me to Disney World, are you? The thought had not actually crossed my mind, but her downward spiral suddenly started to make some sense. She knew she couldn't earn her way into the Magic Kingdom. She had tried and failed that test several times before. So she was living in a way that placed her as far as possible from the most magical place on earth. In rebellion, that's what the law does. It actually drives us further away from the truth. In retrospect, it shows our need, but drives us further away. In retrospect, I'm embarrassed, as God says, to admit that in that moment, I was tempted to turn her fear to my own advantage. The easiest response would have been, if you don't start behaving better, you're right, we won't take you. But by God's grace, I didn't. Instead, I asked her, is this trip something we're doing as a family? She nodded, brown eyes wide and tear-rimmed. Are you part of this family? She nodded again. Then you're going with us. Sure, there may be some consequences to help you remember what's right and what's wrong, but you're part of our family, and we're not leaving you behind. I'd like to say that her behaviors grew better after that moment, but they didn't. Her choices pretty much spiraled out of control at every hotel and rest stop all the way to Lake Buena Vista. Still, we headed to Disney World on the day we had promised, and it was a typical Disney day. Overpriced tickets, overpriced meals, lots of lines, mingled with just enough manufactured magic to consider maybe going again someday. In our hotel room that evening, a very different child emerged. This is what grace does. This child was exhausted, pensive, and a little weepy at times, but her month-long facade of rebellion had faded. When bedtime rolled around, I prayed with her, held her, and asked, so how was your first day at Disney World? She closed her eyes and snuggled down into her stuffed unicorn. After a few moments, she opened her eyes ever so slightly. Daddy, she said, I finally got to go to Disney World. But it wasn't because I was good. It's because I'm yours. Like, that's the nature of the life of grace. Like, some of us are still living this false front, this fallacious facade of, if I can be good enough, I've got to be good enough. And rest, I met with one of my friends this week, one of you guys, and we were talking on Tuesday night, and I said, look, like, I just have to believe what Christ is saying is legitimate, and I rest in that. Because if not, I am riddled and consumed with guilt. Because I can't be good enough. Even when my behaviors, and I've been on a decent stretch here lately, but even when my behaviors are decent, my heart is still deplorable. And if you're quick to rise up this morning and be like, not me, that just proves my point. The heart is deceitful. Scripture literally says that we can't even understand it ourselves. And so when we think we're being good, oftentimes like Paul in Romans chapter 7, we're actually acting contra to that. Our hearts are deceitful. They're even in our redeemed state. We're motivated by the wrong things oftentimes. We do what we should do, and then we feel pride over doing what we should do. And all the while, the law barks our condemnation. The devil barks our condemnation. The flesh, our flesh barks our condemnation. And Christ rises up above all that, and he says, I am life. Like, you get life. You get the way. You understand the truth. You live in reconciliation to God. Regeneration has taken place. A heart that was cold and dead is now beating again within you by grace, because you are mine. And nothing is going to separate you from my love. That's the heart of what Jesus is saying here. And I am fully convinced that if we can be comforted by the radicality of that message, we will live lives of explosive, grace-filled love for the society around us that desperately needs to know the God of creation, the God of all might, the God who rules and reigns, the God of lavish mercy. They desperately need to know it. And this is the fuel. I get it. Like me getting up here on a Sunday and telling you what you need to do and how you need to do it and browbeating you and laying guilt on thick, that will work for about 12 hours. And then one of two things is going to happen. Either you're going to despair and give up, or you're going to grow delusional and think you've done it. And we preach the better way, the life, the truth, the way that is deliverance, that is freedom for your souls. So we get to live for him now. You get to live, you don't have to, you get to live for him. I pray that we will.